All right, everybody. Tesla has reported its first quarter production and deliveries for 2024. One word, ugly. Let's get into the numbers. So from Tesla directly, they produced about 433,000 cars in the first quarter of 2024, and it delivered 386,000 cars in the same quarter. If we compare it to a different time period, so if we go back to the fourth quarter of 2023, which was a quarter ago, they produced 494,000 cars and they deliver 484,000 vehicles. Now, it's important to highlight that the first quarter of any given year in the auto market is going to be seasonally the lowest quarter, but the amount that Tesla has missed the first quarter is quite large, especially if you look at it from a historical perspective. Wall Street was expecting somewhere around 420,000 units. They came in way under that at 380,000, which is down about 20% quarter over quarter. Now, if we look at the first quarter of 2023, they produced 440,000 cars and they deliver 422,000. And if we look at it in the history of Tesla, this is the first time really in at least the last 8 years, but probably in the history of Tesla, where Tesla has reported a lower Q1 versus the previous year's Q1. Here's a chart from James Cat, which is my favorite cat on the internet. Shout out James. And it's the first time in its history that it sold less in the first quarter than it did in any of the previous years. Now, what's interesting about these news is that it's important, I think, to put it within the context of the rest of the market, not just with Tesla. I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. If you're somebody who follows Tesla, who's a fan of Tesla, this is not a good quarter from a numbers perspective for the auto market, but it's also really interesting to see how the rest of the auto market's doing as well, because I think it sheds some light as far as what's going on here. And so the first place we can see this is with BYD. BYD was the largest EV manufacturer in the fourth quarter of 2023, but in the first quarter of 2024, they had a significant drop in electric vehicle sales for that 90-day period. This headline from Reuters: BYD hands back top EV seller title to Tesla after Q1 sales decline. If we look at the numbers closely, they sold about 300,000 EVs in the first quarter. Now, this is in comparison to 526,000 EVs in the fourth quarter of 2023, which essentially means that BYD has had their sales drop quarter over quarter by about 47% versus Tesla's 21% or so. Now, it's important to highlight that BYD is primarily a Chinese manufacturer. Most of their sales are sold in China. And so with the Chinese economy being in rough shape right now, there's a lot of reports coming out of that country that say that there's a lot of issues with the economy. It's no surprise to see that BYD sales are down, but they're down a lot. They're down 47%. And Tesla has a lot of sales in China, so one would think that if BYD is going to have a huge impact from being able to sell EVs in China, Tesla will as well, since it's likely to be its second or even biggest market in the world right now for the company. Another thing I want to look at is at just the broader auto market, not just EVs, but say a company like GM as an example. GM just released its quarterly sales for their entire vehicle lineup. And what's interesting about the news is that even though the retail sales that they reported are up about 6%. So these are dealers selling to the customer base. Their quarter over quarter sales to dealers is actually down 1.5% year over year. Now, what's very interesting about the GM picture is that even though they sold 594,000 in the quarter, which is down 1.5%, they have about 534,000 cars at dealerships in the US as well, which means they have about 80 days of supply on hand. Now, what's interesting about that number is that GM has tried to move more inventory. If we look at this chart, this is the percent change in average transaction prices from December 2023 to March 2024. So basically how much automakers have dropped pricing by. This is all the legacy automakers in the United States. And you can see that Chevy, Cadillac, GMC, Buick's up here as well. These are GM brands, and they're the ones that have dropped the most, some of the biggest price decreases in the United States. Chevy upwards of 9%, GMC something like 6 to 7%, Cadillac with about 8%. And so even with those price decreases in the quarter, GM still has about 80 days on hand. So that's another data point that says, hey, yeah, Tesla number definitely bad. But there's also automakers that are struggling in this environment as well. Some people think it's interest rates. Some people think it's softening demand. Some people think it's just EVs are not selling. I don't buy that piece, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But there's clearly more things going on that's not just Tesla specific, but the broader markets are suffering. Now, an interesting layer on the first quarter for Tesla specifically is that about a week before the quarter ended, Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla, said that the company required FSD demos for every prospective Tesla buyer in North America. And so in case you're not familiar, FSD is Tesla's full self-driving software that they install in every car that allows the car to essentially drive itself with supervision. And they've reached a point, the company thinks, where they can have this thing just in the wild. Just here you go, free trial, try it out. But the way Tesla rolled this out with about a week left is that they were requiring every dealer essentially that they have to sit the customer down and give them a demo. So what that does is it dramatically lowers sales to the customers. Now, I'm not saying the reason why they missed the number against Wall Street expectations and what people were expecting. I'm not saying that was because of that, but it's interesting that they chose to do that during this period when they knew the number was going to be bad. So the company said, we know the number is bad. We're going to do a thing that's going to force us to sell even less because we have to spend more time with the customer. Interesting decision. That to me, something like this tells me that the company isn't so much focused about delivering a specific number for a quarter. They're more focused on ensuring that their next growth wave, which is going to be this software piece, full self-driving, that starts being handled in a certain manner so that the customers know the cars can do that. So that was a very interesting move that the company did. And I want to highlight that because that really talks about the future of the company, in my opinion. Now, another thing to highlight from that report is that Tesla said that they deployed about 4,000 megawatt hours of energy storage products in Q1, the highest quarterly deployment yet, which implies that they're going to post a pretty big number for that part of the business. It's a smaller part of the business, though. It's not this, giant thing like auto is right now. So it's not really going to impact their earnings much, but it is something that they highlighted, which, I'm sure they're throwing like, hey, here's a positive thing that happened. Even if we look at just autos, I think these numbers probably are worse than we think in the first quarter. Because if we look at the numbers, the share of Model 3 and Y for the quarter versus all other models, which is S, X, and the Cybertruck now, is smaller than the previous couple quarters, which means that as the Cybertruck is ramping, which is Tesla's brand new product, their pickup truck, that triangle, refrigerator on wheels, they're starting to sell more and more of those each quarter, but they're selling more of those relative to the rest of the lineup. And because they're kind of early in the ramp, what's usually happens with a company starting to ramp a product is that they're not going to make any money on that product. They're actually going to lose money making that product. So my guess is from a margins perspective, so how much money they're making on the cars, the Cybertruck's going to make the margin number worse for the first quarter than it would have been in, say, the last quarter in Q4 and Q3. Now, layer that on top of the company not even bothering to push more cars in the last week or two, and instead ensuring that everybody has access to the trial for FSD and getting a ride along, which again artificially brings down sales, is that they're not even trying to make that number better, that they're really prioritizing getting people on full self-driving. And the reason why I think the company is doing this is that I think they know that they have something brewing there, something quite special. If you look at all the videos that are coming out for FSD 12, 12.1, 12.2, 12.3, with this free trial that opened up over the last couple of days, at least from my perspective, this is the most amount of excitement I've seen around the story as it pertains to the self-driving piece, to the point where people are now believing that this is a thing, that this is something that's out there for people to try, that it's going to be something valuable, not just for the driver and the passenger, but for the company itself as well. And I really think the company's really shifting its focus away from folks thinking about the company as a car company, but instead thinking about the company as an AI company, as a company that's really focused on making software come alive in their vehicles. If that wasn't the case, I really don't think the company would have taken the last 2 weeks of the quarter, where they traditionally are trying to force as many sales to happen as possible so these numbers look as good as they can be, and instead forcing the company to slow down and instead focus on the software side of the business. It doesn't hide the fact that the numbers are poor for the quarter from a deliveries perspective, but perhaps the company's saying, we don't care about that anymore. And if that works, then that means that Tesla's going to have a fleet of millions of cars out there that will be generating some sort of revenue for the company from a software perspective versus just selling cars. And the more cars they sell, however much they sell, that's a bigger fleet that they can leverage to get that monthly income from people that sign up for full self-driving. Right now it's $200 per month. It could go up, it could go down, but that's the sort of value proposition I think the company is focusing on. Now, the trillion-dollar question is, when is that going to happen? Will that even happen? Will Tesla even get to a point where people are actually signing up for full self-driving on a monthly basis? That Tesla keeps making the vehicle better and better with features so that people have to have the feature. It's not something that it's like a toy or something that's like, oh, like a party trick or something. That is something that it's truly usable, something that can allow you to remove your hands from the wheel and where you don't have to pay attention to the road and the car just drives itself safely from point A to point B. You can just be on your phone or taking a nap or whatever. That's where the magic for the company, I think, really comes together. But it's going through these periods of essentially a transformation where the company itself has to believe that it's not just a car company, it's an AI company. And then more importantly, everyone else has to see with their own two eyes that this is the case. So it's going to be very interesting to see what they say in the first quarter earnings report in 2024, which is scheduled to go live on April 23rd. We'll cover that in the channel here. What I'm expecting to hear from them is a lot of talk about self-driving, about their software, perhaps even their energy business, which I think they're planning on growing a lot this year. And it's going to be less and less about quarterly numbers for their vehicle, especially as they're still a year away from the compact car, which is the car that's going to cost, could start as low as $25,000 before any EV tax credits, which will allow the car to sell millions of units per year. You know, there's a transition between now and then. And I think that time, the company is going to really utilize to push this FSD thing. And then perhaps they can get back to, say, selling 500,000 units per year, perhaps more of their current lineup. But it's quite obvious, I think, given the dynamic of the last few days, what the company's trying to do. Shift focus from car company to AI company. Numbers like these, people are going to be like, what the hell, the sky's falling. But the company's working on that foundation to, I think, getting a software piece out there for people to really enjoy. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. Like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. You want to support the channel. Links in the description below, and we'll see you in the next one. Take it easy, everybody. Bye-bye.